This week on Hip Hop Now podcast, a couple of albums that were shelved in some sort of light of day. Let's go digging.
Let's get right to the business.
Read these headlines. This album must be gone. This album must be gone.
Classic albums are
Permanent Hip Hop Podcast. What up, y'all? I'm your host, Vegas, and this is Hip Hop Now Podcast Extra, a podcast designed to catch you up on all things hip hop music and culture that happened throughout the week. Big shout out to returning listeners. Thanks for the support. New listeners, what up? I'm glad you are here. And if you're listening for the first time, this is a podcast designed to catch you up on all things hip hop music and culture, right? And that's what we do here. It's usually a podcast where we focus on the news of the week. And sometimes when we have a slow news week or something compelling really happens in the hip hop game, we'll do an episode which we title Extra, where we focus in on one topic at hand. If you go back and look at past podcasts, there are a number of podcasts we've done, that focused on one topic at hand. Most recently, one that's pretty good and did pretty good as far as numbers go, highlighted the year 1988, a number of albums that celebrate 30 years of being in the hip-hop game. So you want to go check that out. It's definitely dope. It's just, when you go and look at the list, you can't even fathom how much came out in that year that's considered classic today. But today we're talking about albums that either got shelved because they never happened, or they were shelved at one point, they were a rumor at one point, they were a myth at one point, and now they've seen the light of day. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Vegas World INC. Also subscribe to the YouTube page, B-Roll Network on YouTube. I got a special treat coming up for hip hop fans, especially those fans of nostalgia, those fans of history, those people who just like to learn. Don't matter if you're young or old, about what's in the past. But we gonna trust me, it's coming. We're gonna keep hush on that. But please know that this podcast is available on everything from iTunes to Google Play, SoundCloud, everything you can think of. Android, Apple devices, all of it. Just search Hip Hop Now Podcast, but the hub is soundcloud.com/Hip Hop Now Podcast. Now, we're going to get this party started. Big shout out to complex.com, where I'm getting this story from. And this is a story or article that I read a good 4 years ago. That's crazy. And I've been holding on to it for this long. Also, shout out to Pocket. If you don't know, Pocket is an app that you can use to save articles you want to read later. There's a whole bunch of different ways and apps that do this type of thing, but I like to use Pocket, right? Because you can use it across devices, so whether you're switching back and forth between Apple, Android, doesn't matter. But I tend to save articles that I either like, that I would read again, or articles that I'm like, this would make a good episode. See how I'm doing research? But this particular article, written by BJ Steiner on complex.com, it was called Rap Albums That Got Shelved into Oblivion. And typically when it comes to Complex, especially in recent years, and other sites, not just them, I always read their lists with a grain of salt, right? I don't pretend to be, I'm not a hip hop police. I'm not a hip hop historian. I love the game. I've been in it for a while from different angles. There's things I just know based off of facts, that are out there. For you to, get that information, you come here, right? But, I wanted to read this because, for one, time passes and, you remember rumors from certain times. And, sometimes you forget about albums that were supposed to come out or albums that were being thought about, even albums that you didn't even know were going to happen. You know what I'm saying? So I thought this list was pretty good. So let's get right into it and talk about it real quick. Now, if you don't know, um, albums getting shelved was a thing once upon a time. Um, Quick example, um, and this is something that to me altered Nas's career, right? Because this is my example. I think it's one of the best examples because when you're talking about somebody who's so great in the hip hop game, this was a case where not necessarily a shelved album, but a shelved version of an album kind of altered how we look at his discography. But Nas had Illmatic, and he had It Was Written, and everybody was wondering what the third follow-up would be. And that third follow-up was going to be I Am Nostradamus, a double album by Nas. That got bootlegged before it came out and featured a number of classic Nas records. Like, and classic Nas records, some of which were released in other forms later, but songs like Blaze of 50, Fetus, Project Window, Drunk by Myself, like just a whole bunch of different Nas records that wound up being on like the Lost Tapes, and some wound up being on the albums that officially came out, I Am Nostradamus. But the double album itself was dope. I mean, it was to the point where if that double album would have ever dropped, I don't know if people would have ever felt like Nas fell off. I don't think the takeover Stillmatic thing would have really happened because Nas would have been on a different trajectory. And some people are thinking to themselves, well, what do you mean? Well, this is the thing. The I Am Nostradamus that dropped was dope. But because of when the leaks happened, that was a time where record labels, they wouldn't put it out anyway. They wouldn't say, oh, well, that's the dirty, muddy version. Here's the mastered version. They wouldn't put it out anyway. Typically, they would shelve that entire album and all its songs, or they would save songs here and there and just record new songs. And that's what happened with Nas. He recorded and probably had a whole bunch of throwaways that became the songs that filled the albums I Am and the album Nostradamus. Now we know I Am was, yeah. And we know Nostradamus was complete trash, right? We can all agree on that, right? For the most part, except for songs like Project Window, which would have appeared on the original. So back in that time, that's how things just went. If your album was leaked, chances are that version of the album was getting shelved. And there's so many dope albums that never saw the light of day as a result of that, right? Well, this article focuses on, rap albums and mixtapes that got shelved for one reason or another. And some were eventually released and some weren't. So the first one that's up here is KMD's Black Bastards. It was supposed to be released in 1993, but eventually was released in 2001. So yes, you can go and get that. And I'm going to read an excerpt from the article. While KMD is most often remembered for housing a young MF Doom, who was known by the name of Zev Love X, the group's sophomore effort, Black Bastards, remains equally remembered as one of the most infamous shelved albums in rap history. While Black Bastards featured a pronounced lyrical and sonic maturation that would make the album a cult classic amongst rap aficionados, Elektra Records reportedly refused to release the album due to the controversial cover art depicting a stereotypical Sambo figure being lynched. Now, when you look at this album cover today, you know, it may still be controversial to some people, but at the same time, it's not that bad. But the album was eventually released on Ready Rock Records in 2011. So you can go and get that. But I remember at the time that was when that album was shelved. It was highly anticipated before it came out, and rap fans felt a little cheated that it wasn't coming out. Another album that, and this album in this case never came out. It never happened. Dr. Dre and Ice Cube's album together entitled Helter Skelter. This was the early beginnings of Aftermath Records when Dre had left Death Row, and him and Ice Cube did, I think they did a record called Helter Skelter, and it was for a soundtrack. I can't remember what soundtrack or whatever. And I remember the record did well. Damn, I can't remember that record. The record did well, and people were thinking like, damn, why don't Dr. Dre and Ice Cube make an album together like the old days, like the NWA days? It was supposed to feature, okay, I remember. The record they did together was called Natural Born Killers. And it was off the Murder Was the Case soundtrack, Snoop joint, which was cool. But the Helter Skelter album featuring Dr. Dre and Ice Cube as a duo was supposed to feature the DLC, Scarface, and Snoop Dogg, among others. And it never happened, man. And it's kind of whack that never happened, at least at that time, because, I was a big Ice Cube fan, always been a Dre fan. I don't know if I was as much of a fan of the whole Helter Skelter part. For one, there's already a Helter Skelter. Shout out to Ruck and Rock, Sean Price, rest in peace. And two, I don't know, they was kind of going for this, two psycho killers type thing, and that's not why we like y'all. We wanted gangster rap. So this one not coming out. It's not such a big deal. Now, another album that got shelved, that was supposed to be released in 1996 and eventually was released in 2003, is I.N.I's Center of Attention. If you don't know, I.N.I is a group from the 90s that had you could probably consider it like a hip hop classic as far as the single goes. The track called Fakin' Jacks. The group itself included Grap Lover, Marco Polo, and Rob O. And I actually had this album, Center of Attention. It took me, honestly, it was released in 2003. I probably didn't hear it until maybe 2016. For real. Because for one, I didn't know it was released. And when I tell you this, what year was it supposed to come out again? It was supposed to come out in 1996. If this album was released in 1996, also, mind you, produced by Pete Rock, Grap Lover being Pete Rock's brother. If this album was released in 1996, it would be one of those albums that we talk about when we talk about that time. You talk about dope beats, like Pete Rock laced them in the same way that, and this is not a diss of any kind, this is not being disrespectful, this is just pointing out the level of production. But this is similar to what DJ Premier did with Group Home. Obviously, Group Home not being as good a lyricist as I. But when you talk about somebody having beats and being on top of their game and really crafting an album that was dope, I, Center of Attention, this was a pretty dope album. I'm glad I have it. I'm glad it was eventually released. go out and find it because it's worth your time. Trust me. But another quick note: this was another album that was also shelved by Lecture Records, and the group wound up disbanding. Let me read a little quote from the article, though. However, the album would find an eventual home with minor alterations as part of Pete Rock's double disc retrospective Lost and Found Hip Hop Underground Soul Classics in 2003. I don't know about that thing. I know I have the album, though. So, find that out if you want to check out that I album. Another album that was supposed to be released in 1996, and if it would have been released in 1996, it would have been another album we would be talking about to this day. Like, yo, remember when this album dropped? It was crazy back then. I played it to death. And that is Large Professor's The LP. And this album also was eventually released in 2009. And guess what? I just heard it in 2017. I'm sorry, y'all. Like, again, this is why this episode is called Lost and Found Hip Hop. Because I just started searching one day, and I knew people was talking about it. A couple people told me, went on Spotify, it was there, listened to it. And I have to say, man, this is this album coming out in 2009 instead of 1996 is almost criminal. For one, because a lot of the production, obviously, some being done by Large Professor, so classic, so dope. Records you heard before in bits and pieces, didn't realize it was all on the same album. Let's read some excerpts real quick. Let's see. So Large Professor was signed by Geffen Records by 1993 after a series of singles, including The Mad Scientist and I Just Want to Chill, failed to attract the attention that the main Source group did. Large Pro found himself being unceremoniously dropped by Geffen Records, leaving his solo debut album. Mind you, this was Large Professor's debut album after leaving main Source. The LP adrift. Crazy, man. It's crazy how things can alter time and alter hip hop history. Large Professor not being in main Source was a big deal back then, and he dropped "Faking the Funk," his classic verse on A Tribe Called Quest Midnight Marauders, by the album When I Drop It. Anticipation was there. We knew he was coming. This was working with Nas. Like, Large Professor had a lot of momentum going into this album. And the simple fact that when it was supposed to drop, it never did because the singles didn't do well. Well, it's kind of criminal. It's kind of terrible also at the same time. But this is Geffen Records. Jizz already told you about them. You know what I'm saying? Well, is when they looking for a suit and tie rap, that, how it go. You know the verse, protect your neck. But definitely criminal that didn't come out, man. Disgusting. Let's start running through these a little bit. The Commission album, the Notorious B.I.G., Jay-Z, and Charlie Baltimore, was a group that was formed after the Firm, for the most part, or during the Firm, which was Nas, AZ, and Foxy. I think it's quite obvious why this one never came out. The Notorious B.I.G. was murdered in L.A., and poof, all the plans of this went out the window. But the plan was to have this trio of MCs, being Charlie Baltimore, Jay-Z, and Big. Always boggled my mind that it was Charlie Baltimore and not Lil' Kim, which would have been a way better trio, but who knows. But when you look at everything that, as far as Jay-Z and Big's collaborations, like Brooklyn Finest and I Love the Dough, one could only hope that album was going to be crazy. And at that given time, Big was on fire, Jay-Z was rising. It wouldn't have mattered if Charlie Baltimore was just serviceable chances are it would have been really dope, really, really dope, as long as Dr. Dre didn't produce it. Or maybe he could produce it and it would have been better than the firm. Who knows? Who cares? Another album that was supposed to be released in hold up, I lost my place. That was supposed to be released. Let's see, what year was that? In 1998 was the original release date, and that is Cormega's The Testament. Of course, if you don't know, this album did eventually get released in 2005. And I think this is probably one of the albums on this list that I actually heard when it was released. But this was Cormega's debut album, straight out the firm in 1998. Let's read some quotes. With a co-sign from Nasty Nas himself, Queens rapper Cormega was signed to Def Jam Records with plans to release his debut album, The Testament, in 1998. However, Cormega would find his buzz significantly diminished after he was unceremoniously dropped from the lineup of rap supergroup The Firm in favor for fellow QB rapper Nature, and plans for The Testament release stalled. A few years later, Cormega would regain The Testament's masters before releasing the album on his own label, Legal Hustle Records, in 2005 to critical acclaim. Now, that's kind of a dope end to a story, right? So we all know Cormega was in the firm originally with Foxy, AZ, and Nas, and then he was basically dropped from the group. Kind of rightfully so, to be honest. He really didn't fit in that group at all. He wasn't the best MC, and next to Nas and AZ and even Foxy, he would stick out like a sore thumb. It's kind of like when you listen to a Fugees record and Prize comes on and you kind of like, who is this again? You know what I'm saying? But it's dope that he was able to get his masters, because when people don't want it, labels don't want it, they don't have no problem giving it up. You probably got to pay a fee, but it probably was enough for him to pay. And he released it. And let me tell you this, right? I know what I said about Cormega, but this honesty about that dude as a rapper, and he got a little bit better over time. That makes his music interesting, and The Testament is a dope album for which I own, to be honest. So check that out. It's out there. Another album that was supposed to happen, basically a super group, was Murder Inc. No, not the group you're talking about or you're thinking about, but the group that was supposed to be Jay-Z, DMX, and Ja Rule, who had like 3 hits together, or together and separate in some ways. That being It's Murder, Can I Get Her, and Money Cash Hoes. Never came to fruition. There was a number of things that happened back then that I could see how that didn't happen. There was DMX feeling like Ja Rule was kind of jacking his style. There probably was a little bit of rivalry between Jay-Z and DMX. They battled before. And then, DMX was huge. Ja Rule was becoming huge, but was still kind of third wheel. And Jay-Z was becoming huge as an artist. So, like, a collaboration like this probably just wasn't best for business when everybody's rising as solo artists. And I'm obviously taking a stab at it as far as a guess, but I would say this. Think about Redman and Method Man. In some respects, that whole, pairing of the two probably should have never happened for the sake of their solo careers, because it was huge for them together, money-wise. They got a movie, TV show, all of that. But the albums, kind of the Black albums, they're good, but they're kind of forgettable. And now when you look at their history, as soloists, once they started Meth and Red together, they kind of stalled as soloists for the most part. Slowly but surely. It wasn't like a complete stop, but now you look back at it. Redman was on the roll, and it was just too much going on. But Murder Inc. was something that I was kind of interested in, but kind of glad it didn't happen. NWA's album, Not These Niggas Again. And that was the reunion album that was supposed to be released in 2000 that was going to feature Dr. Dre, Ice Cube, MC Ren, DJ Yella, and Snoop was going to take Eazy-E's role. As a fan of NWA, man, I was looking forward to this. I'm not even going to lie. Especially, I felt like Snoop was the perfect person to put in the group. It might have sounded odd a little bit. I don't know. Ice Cube wasn't the same Ice Cube he used to be, but with Dr. Dre behind it all, I kind of felt like it was probably going to be dope. Never happened. They had one record they put out called Chin Check. That was the first official single, if you will, of NWA since 1991. But in the song Chin Check was cool, but it was more of like a appetizer. And as a fan, I wanted the mail, but it never happened. The Fugees' third album was supposed to be released in 2000, then was supposed to be released in 2005, and obviously it never saw the light of day. This is coming off of their success with The Score. This is coming off Lauryn Hill's The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, Wyclef's album, The Carnival, which is a dope album. A lot really slept on, kind of classic type album. Even Prize put out an album. I think it was Ghetto Superstar. That was his hit record. But unfortunately, yeah, we still kind of waiting on that Fugees album. And unlike A Tribe Called Quest, finally coming out with an album, I don't think you're getting a Fugees album. Not at all. Rakim's album entitled Oh My God. Actually, they could release that today, I could tell you that. But it was supposed to be released in 2002 and was never released. This was the album that Rakim was working on with Dr. Dre. If you notice, we've already mentioned Dr. Dre 3 times. What are you doing, Dre? What are you doing, fam? You and everybody you involved with, man, you shelved. Everything is shelved. I watched our interview with Rakim recently about this album in particular, and on the Torre show. And Rakim, said back then, he said in this interview that it was just creative differences between him and Dr. Dre. Dr. Dre wanted him to talk more street stuff, I guess, have more street lyrics, and that's just not what Rakim was feeling. He wasn't really trying to be more of a gangster rapper with it. And honestly, I think Dr. Dre just wanted to work with Nas again. Because if you know Rakim, that ain't Rakim's style. Rakim lyrics are always, you could tell they're always coming from a real place. And have Rakim doing gangster rap, for the most part, that's what it would have been. Just would have been so whack. But I was still looking forward to this. I'm mad it never happened. MOP's Ghetto Warfare was supposed to be released in 2003, but actually came out in 2006. This is an album that I actually have. I believe this is the album that was supposed to drop on Rockefeller. MOP was signed to Rockefeller in 2002 after leaving Loud Records, but this album actually never came out. and was released on an independent label in 2006. Uh, what's the name of the label? Full Clip Media. This album is just a damn shame. Should have came out. It's pretty dope, but it should have came out. You know what I'm saying? And it's, again, this is one of those records that if it would have dropped on Rockefeller at the height of Rockefeller at the time they were signed, MOP's trajectory would have been a little bit different. But you live and you learn. Guess who's on here again? Dr. Dre for Detox. We all know the story behind this. We about to just skip over this, but here's the planned release dates for Detox. And I'm going to add one since this article is old, but 2003, 2005, 2007, 2008, 2010, 2011, and most recently, I believe maybe 2015 or 16. Detox was supposed to come out, and then the Compton album came out. Was it ever released? No. This is like, we're not even going to talk about it, man. Just go listen to my old podcast. It just sucks that this album never happened. Another album, we're gonna wrap this thing up. Another album that never saw the light of day, Nas and DJ Premier's collaborative album. It was talked about so many times. It was also like an article in I think Spin magazine or some Fader, one of those magazines where, I thought it was really going to happen. They had an article with Nas and Premier talking about doing an album together, and it never happened. And who knows why? Who knows? But you do have Prime and Prime 2, Royce the 5'9" and DJ Premier. So go get that. Not the same thing, but I know how it go. Another album, Jules Santana and Lil Wayne album, I Can't Feel My Face. This, I believe, was supposed to come out sometime around 2007. Again, never saw the light of day. Lil Wayne was on fire around that time. Jules Santana still kind of had a buzz. He wasn't, running from airports like now. Never came out. I don't think this album's ever coming out, to be real. Raekwon's Only Built for Cuban Links Part 2 came out in 2009. Hip-hop fans loved it, but it was originally supposed to drop in 2005 and 2007, which I did not know. But I do remember that. Scarface and Beanie Siegel's album, Mac and Brad. Man, I wish this would have happened. Damn. Another one, just like the Jules Santana and Lil Wayne album, one of those pairings where you're like, this is a perfect fit. This would be a dope album. Just never happened, which just sucks because everything they collaborated on made sure it was dope. Here's an album that has been supposed to have been released over 10 years ago in 2007. And in recent years, it was supposed to come out, and it's still not out. And that's Ghostface and MF Doom's album, Swift and Changeable. Man, I was looking forward to that album. I mean, my God. What's another one? Andre 3000's solo album, which was supposed to be released in 2011, 2012, 2014. Never happened. Outkast. Another Outkast album. Never happened, which is sad, but that one could still happen. Still got hope. And lastly, Jay Electronica, Act 2, Patents of Nobility, The Turn. Supposed to be released in 2009, where his buzz was off the charts. Almost 10 years later, we do not have anything. This is the album, the debut album that went over to Rock Nation when he got signed there. It's the album that Just Blaze says he has on his phone. It's the album that Just Blaze told us was crazy, and we've never heard any of it. Jay Electronica is worthy of a podcast by himself. Because it's just one thing that's just never heard of. We named a number of albums and a number of reasons why they were shelved. We know there were, from death to record sales not being there to artists and producers not finding the time, to even record label negotiation stuff, all types of reasons. But Jay Electronica, just hear this. Hip hop fans know this, but if you're not really a hip hop fan, and maybe Jay Electronica is a blip on your radar, this is a dude who has some serious momentum and has never had a debut album. And that was almost 10 years ago. And you would say to yourself, well, what was it? He's a one-hit wonder. Yeah, I guess you can say that, but one-hit wonders actually drop albums, though. And he had a mixtape that created a lot of that buzz prior to Exhibit C. Honestly, I'm probably one of those people who still want to hear it, but the buzz is dead, and people will be highly critical of it. But the silver lining is when you look at albums like Large Professor's The LP and I&I's album and Cormega's The Testament, maybe one day when Rock Nation drops Jay Electronica and he either buys the masters or he gets an independent deal and they just put it out with no worries, no cares, this is what was supposed to come out, they can get a couple of crumbs and, we can get to hear what was supposed to be. Hopefully. That's going to do it for me for this week. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at VegasWorldINC. If Facebook is what you like to do, Facebook.com/hiphop right now. Hit that like button. And please know that this podcast is available on your mobile device, whether that be an Apple or Android, as well as the hub, SoundCloud.com/hiphopnowpodcast. Until next time, y'all, I am not a critic. I'm a fan. Peace.
Drop it on the random.